Okay, welcome everyone. I am going to be talking to you today about intersectional pedagogy, its place in the English classroom. If you can hear me, audio is fine. Can you just type in the chat so everything is okay? Also, while we're waiting for others to come in, you could, thank you, Catherine, for that, right? So I've put some contact details on. So if you would like to contact me further, ask me any questions, my email address is there and my Twitter as well. So I'm at Sophia Kapcia on Twitter. Okay, so let us begin then. Let us begin. And as always, we're going to start with the back. I'm going to start with the objectives of this session to ensure that we do achieve or objective what we want to achieve today. So at the end, if we haven't, you can come back and ask me any questions that we haven't achieved. So our objectives today, we are going to be answering these 5 questions today. What is intersectionality? What is intersectional pedagogy? The importance of intersectional pedagogy to classroom practice, and also how to differentiate the English curriculum using intersectional pedagogy. And I thought this was very important to think about strategies. What strategies use to effectively embed intersectionality in the classroom? And of course, this is not going to be exhaustive. It's something for you to reflect on, to go away, to add to say, okay, what can I do to ensure that my practice is intersectional? Okay, so let me introduce myself. Let me just give you some context, some background about me. I have 20 years experience as an English teacher in the secondary school, so at the secondary level. I was born in Jamaica. I'm mom to 5 girls. And so that is like the basis of, who I am in terms of identity, in terms of connections, etc. And then why am I interested in intersectionality? Why am I interested in this and intersectionality? Pedagogy. So initially, being in the classroom, teaching, being in a lot of diverse classroom settings, the research was focused on Black Caribbean boys and their underachievement. I know you would have remembered the buzz around that. And then moved to white working class boys. And that's where we are at right now. If you think about in terms of where the research is centered around underachievement. Okay, so in the classroom, one of the main things is about inequity and how to raise the attainment of students. So in my roles as working as a teacher, classroom practitioner, an English teacher, I have been in charge in raising the PP students and also non-PP students, and Strand in 2016 in published work focused on the inequity that exists. There is still a gap which is widening between PP students and non-PP students. And then since 2012, the gap between low-income pupils' attainment at the end of primary school and the end of secondary school has widened, and the DFE 2017 reported that. So it's very pertinent because that's the situation now, what is happening. Where we have inequity, and as classroom teachers, as English teachers, we need to address that and find out how we're going to increase that gap. Okay, so the first question is intersectionality, what it is. So the term, it is a buzzword in America and it is now here as well. So you've heard a lot about intersectionality and how to be more intersectional. So the term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, being said to be the most important contribution to women's studies. That's what McCall has said. So Crenshaw, she postulates the idea that focusing on the most privileged group members will ultimately marginalize those who are not as privileged. So we will be creating some marginalization, some oppression within our classroom if we do that. So, and sects, these group members who are marginalized are essentially the underprivileged in society. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for a while. Think about that, and then Davis, what did he talk? He spoke about in his research that intersectionality has been used in numerous ways, right? So social sciences has used it to look at social categories such as gender, ethnicity, and class. And we have used it also to examine differences and similarities within social categories and to focus on multiple intersecting inequalities between other social categories as well. Of my studies. So I'm a PhD student as well. So I'm at the point in my research where I'm analyzing my data so I write up and submit. So my study focused on inequality and the inequity that exists in education. And it was very important for me to look at both inequality and inequity, right? Because those are terms that, even though they have commonalities, they're different. So we focused on inequity and equality, and then the research examined how English teachers address inequalities in education and how teachers use their knowledge of the intersectional categories that exist between gender, race, and class to restore students' achievement and success in education. The gap found in the gap literature, some context. So when we go in to analyze what I found and how we can practice, then you have that basis. So the gap in the literature. So in teacher training, there isn't any intersectional pedagogy. So there isn't any practice there. Also, I found that the research was quite limited. So when I went to find the research, I was saying, oh wow, how was I going to really get the background, because there was limited research. And therefore the hope is that this research that I'm doing will go away to help practice, to help teachers and their practice in the classroom. Also, finding out what knowledge do teachers have, how is it applied? That was also something, because there wasn't any intersectional there for English classrooms and how to apply it, and how do English classroom look like if it's being intersectional. So that question did arise as well. So as I said, there was information in terms of intersectional pedagogy, in terms of the techniques and strategies for teaching and learning. So I'm just going to briefly about the research problem. Well, I did speak to the inequity and inequality that exists in British education and how teachers use their knowledge and understanding to really raise the attainment of their students. I'm going to look at the rationale as well, maybe more in it, the research design and the theoretical framework. So the research problem, as I said before, it was about inequity. The rationale for the study was because intersectionality allows us to not only make our classrooms more inclusive, but look at constructs in society, such as race, class, and gender intersectionally. It also allows us to focus on the identities that combine to produce what McCall calls complex inequality. It also allows us to examine how multiple interact and become separate disadvantaging factors which may intersect at different points to create different power relationships. And it also highlights the impact of race and racism. To, this is a reality for us, so it does highlight that impact on marginalized groups and the question of social justice. These are some of the things that the research highlighted. So, next question, what is intersectional pedagogy? I've spoken a lot about that. So it's a methodology of teaching and learning where disparity and marginalization cause from intersecting social identities. So if you think about it, we all have intersect identities. We have different races, different classes, different genders, different cultural backgrounds as well. So these, the marginalization caused by these intersecting identities are understood, are clarified, and are interrogated. So this process offers people new ways of understanding persistent patterns. It also helps to reflect and show respect to the complexity of diversity. So I'm just going to share with you some researchers and what they say. So Grant, he postulates that it is important for teachers to have an intersectionally aware teacher identity. And Ferber and Herrera, they argue that the absence of intersectionality have the potential of doing more harm than good for pupils from marginalized backgrounds. And in my research, the data showed some teachers actually were quite hesitant to use intersectional pedagogy because they thought, oh, I'm stereotyping. But it's the idea of realizing utilizing these pedagogy within your lesson, within your practice, will do more harm than good, because they do not acknowledge the multiplicity of identities that students come to the table with. What they do is isolate, and this could also invalidate these pupils. And Berger and Guidras, they believe intersectional pedagogy encourage people's social literacy, which will allow pupils to increase their ability to recognize internalized oppression. And what's really good with English, we have a platform here to really delve in to deep and rich topics. We delve into really wide topics such as racism, such as oppression, such as inequality. And I tell my students, English touches on every subject, so we can pull into other subjects to really have that well-developed, robust discussions within our classrooms. So, and for the methodology, I had focus group discussions, and I also had interviews. Had focus discussions with each teachers, and the interviews were 20 structured, semi-structured, yes, and 20 teachers from who worked in a working class setting, well, predominantly, because what the research showed was that there wasn't any monoculture really in terms of school. So within all the schools, there were even if it was predominantly working class, there were other classes as well, like middle class, even if it was a small section of the. I'm sharing my research questions also to cement what we are going to do later. So the first research question: to what extent does the intersectionality, class, race, and gender affect pupils' achievement and attitude to English? Next, what factors does influence attainment in English classes? How do teachers implement strategies to tackle the problem of differential attainment in English classes? And to what extent do teachers use intersectional pedagogy, the structures of race, class, and gender in their classes to ensure pupil attainment? So what were the research findings? So we're now going to look at some takeaways for artists, looking at those research questions. What teachers say about intersectionality? So this was what teachers had to say, and it was really good and useful because it did acknowledge the fact that teachers, even though some teachers did say, I sent out prior to the interview and the focus group, I sent out the research schedules, the questions, the definition, glossary of terms, basically. And it was useful because teachers did say, initially not really think about, well, know what intersectional pedagogy was or intersectionality, and definitely wasn't using it within their practice. And it made them be more deliberate about using intersectional pedagogies within their practice. So these are some teachers had to say. I hope you find them useful. I'll go through them. So they don't fit into one box because it's a whole overlap of different circumstances. So the acknowledgement that students, there's not a one size fits all, because our students, they come to us with so many different identities that will impact their attainment. But it's not that easy in terms of teaching and learning to, in a way, sort of, discriminate in that way and put everyone, so it is going to work for all Black students. And what this teacher was saying, with intersectional pedagogy and practices, we are, any topic that we're doing, we are trying to center our students in the middle. What do I mean by that? So if we're talking, we're doing a creative writing exercise, we're going to allow that we have different images, and we're going to use different multimodal text and presentation. We'll be looking at the strategies, so I'll go into that even more. There's sort of a mixture in terms of political, social, and it's really good to realize that our students come from a different, they have different political experiences, different economic experiences, and definitely different social experiences. It's not just race and gender and class and disability. And as this teacher puts it so nicely, they all overlap, and then that becomes a child. And I think that is really about all the things that these students are coming to us with in the classroom. And there's not one way you can identify students, and that sums it up, I think. We're not putting labels, and intersectional pedagogy will allow us to cater. Another thing that came out was teachers to have that cultural understanding of people's backgrounds. And this was from a teacher in the study who, when we go into a classroom as English teachers, right, we have obviously the knowledge of teaching English to students. But I think one of the things that teachers, English teachers, not just English teachers, all teachers lack, is an understanding of pupils and pupils' background, and understanding of specifically cultural backgrounds. That we need to understand the cultural backgrounds that students have as well. The importance of pedagogy to classroom practice, let's look at that. Why is it important? So teachers talked about, they spoke about the English curriculum and the question, does it allow an intersectional approach? And that is something that we really need to think about, because we have to use the English curriculum, especially for key stage more set. So teachers believe that the English curriculum fails to connect and link with students' lived experiences. So the lived experiences of students, they think that that's a failure in the English curriculum. As one teacher summed it up, they all spoke about the English curriculum being not fit for purpose because pupils don't care about, they don't care about poetry, they don't care about you know, Shakespeare and poetry. I want you to, the teacher isn't saying that students don't care about it because they don't think it's to their education. What she was underlining was that they don't care about these because there's no connection, there's no link, there's tied to what they're going through each and every day. So the whole idea that, yes, if we're teaching Shakespeare, if we're teaching these poetry that's set on, we have a set anthology, we need to ensure that we make those connections and make those links to lived experiences so they can feel a part of it. I definitely remember, I can think about my experiences at school. What resonated most with me from that time was anything that was taught that I found me, because it applied to me, or I could see examples of myself within it. I could see models. It made it more relatable. It made it more appealing to me. And especially for our disenfranchised students or disengaged students, that's something that we need to think about. Teachers talked about as well the English curriculum not identifying with all sectors of the community. One teacher said, absolutely not. There's no identity. It doesn't identify with so many sectors of the community. For the Black kids, we don't have any Black poets or Black writers in there for the Asian kids. And she was talking about the Key Stage 4 curriculum. We know curriculum does have more scope for intersectionality and intersectional practices. And there's so many fantastic writers and, books and things like that. So that idea that the curriculum must identify with our students as well. Also, teachers talked about the female depiction in the curriculum. One teacher said, at GCSE, we look at Blood Brothers, and obviously there's massive class lines go through that. Sadly, with some of the other GCSE stuff, our hands are tied, aren't they? Because of Shakespeare, you can't do anything with that. The vast majority of the poetry is written by old white men. But actually, to talk about that with the students and say, actually the reason that there's not a lot of, urban poetry that we are seeing is because, actually people didn't necessarily, it was important to educate women to be able to produce their own literature and things like that. And I put that in because the need to be representative, to have and I speak about catering to all genders, all races, all classes, and making sure that that runs through your practice. It links to the students' experiences. What I find as well, as this teacher shared, the opportunity for especially GCSE level, to have those discussions with students about depiction in the curriculum, saying, yes, we're looking at these texts because, and this underlines what was happening, could generate some really good discussions. Or, as I said before, you to elucidate the bigger issues in society. So one teacher talked about how she talked about those things aren't in the GCSE, and they understand that. So the students understand that, and actually quite often they feel strongly about that. I mean, obviously with the more modern poetry, they have an effort to make it more multicultural, but even then the students will understand that it's not available. And actually some of the poems themselves deal with this whole idea of not valuing and not valuing where people come from and prioritizing one thing over another and all that kind of stuff. So it will allow, that empathy. You can embed that within your practice. So what teachers say about the benefits of intersectional pedagogy? Teachers need to deliberately recognize in their practice that pupils have multiple identities that intersect to make who they are. The English curriculum must be inclusive to all pupils. And I've put must there, that modal verb, because it is, that's a definite thing that we want to accomplish. Right now, it is an ideal, but moving forward, we can make go ways to make this a reality. One teacher says about this, just in the way that it is in most classrooms, you've got students from a diverse backgrounds, and they've all got their own personal background as well as kind of sociological backgrounds that they bring to the classroom with themselves. And so it's a case of trying to ensure that none of the students feel that they're singled out or isolated or, treated differently because of all the different factors that they bring into the classroom. And that is something, yes, as I said, we're working towards, and we need to work towards. So I'm going to look at that one. So we're going to the nice bit of it. We're moving on nicely. How to differentiate the English curriculum using intersectional pedagogy. I know this is something that we all will want to know and want to find out. So with curriculum, as the researcher before, said, we have lots of scope to discuss social literacy, lots of scope. So that's something that we can use sectionally to create that. So I'll go back to that in a minute, but Steve Jobs, a quote from Steve Jobs to kind of cement where I'm going to try to push this discussion. The storyteller is the most powerful person in the world. So how can we use intersectional pedagogy? A teacher talks about, the question, is a teacher's identity an essential tool when we're intersectional pedagogy? And what came out of the research was, yes, it is a tool that teachers need to utilize. One teacher says, I use my own personal experiences, my identity, emphasizing the fact that I'm proud of my identity. You know what I mean? So these different means of getting through to these kids, and you to find, I think, with each one is not a hard rule. It's like with each child, there's a door that will and say, okay, like with the girls, they like their hair and the beauty and the makeup. And I try and find a simple path in like trying to address it like that. So this teacher used something, and yes, that would not be for all girls, but in intersectional practices, that's why it's useful. So you're talking about hobbies or what we like to do, and you would have part topic on makeup, on hair, on football, so you're addressing a range of topics that even if there isn't a girl who likes makeup, she might like football or she might like cricket, and she might like. I remember doing an exercise with our students, and were doing creative writing. They were supposed to think of celebration that they went to, and I 90%, it was a 90% white class, and then I had 10% ethnic. So I had a range of pictures. I had a skate, I had a musical festival, I had a girl in a sari, I had going to the beach, I had a family outing. So I had a really diverse images, and surprisingly, and these doing it intersectionally will surprise you, because when students chose a festival that they went to, it surprised me because about 40% of the white students chose the girl in the sari. And why? It reminded them of maybe they went to a friend's celebration, or they had a friend who told them about celebration. So giving these students these wide of things to choose from is really applicable and useful, very useful. So moving on to the next one. So this teacher talks about using the avenue of storytelling. She said that I've tried to overcome is by education, number one. I think that the fact that I'm from South Africa, I use that a lot in terms of helping, especially that particular topic of racism. I use the fact of where I'm from and how I've addressed it and how our countries have addressed it in South Africa. I try to get them to understand that I'm not saying that that's a magic formula. But also another thing that I do is build relationships with students. And I know that you all will agree when I say build relationships. That is paramount, really. It's we have to have that relationship. Students come into my lesson and they say, "Oh, Miss, I ran to your lesson and noticed that pronoun there, you know, it's not their lesson." So having that relationship, because they do, if they're not doing your work, it's your work, it's not their work. So yes, it is important to have that relationship. The intersection, we're moving on now to the intersectional practices teachers in the study believe would effectively embed intersectionality in their classroom practice. So this came out of the focus group, and we looked at what would a scheme of work look like if we were going to have an intersectional scheme of work that had oracy topics were very important. And all of these that I'm going through are what they thought were definite must. Of course, there are others that could come on it, but these were like the number one that they're like, without these on the scheme of work, we don't believe it would be really using intersectional practices. So oracy topics such as race, such as gender. So you build your discussion, whether you're doing a debate, whether you're looking at persuasive writing, whether you're looking at speeches, whether you're looking at Shakespeare, you talk about race and class and gender, and also maybe compare it to today. So you look at alternative perspectives and how a modern day audience would relate to it. They also believe that using multimodal text was also important. And some examples of these multimodal texts that we could use. So I'm looking at societal role reversal, using the Bridgertons as an example, a video example of that. Also, role reversals is also shown in Noughts and Crosses, Mallory Blackman, and Year 9. That's on the Year 9 curriculum. I've definitely taught it to my Year 8s and my Year 9s, but it's not on the Key Stage 4. So as I said before, Key Stage 3 does have that scope, and it's to find in Key Stage 4, yes, along with the set text, we can find extracts to further elucidate, extracts to further consolidate learning. So it's just thinking of different ways to do that. Using, as I said before, different images, what you're talking about. So if you're doing race, you have a range of different races, and being really deliberate about that, so that the images that we show aren't only of one race. It is a cross-section of the race, say, our society, using different genres as well. So yes, it's English, so we are at, for example, complaint letters in formal and informal language, using transactional writing tasks that link to real life skills that they will need in the future. And there's just so many transactional writing tasks that you can do: reviews, letters of complaints, a speech to be presented to an assembly. And then with that, you could link those to the oracy topics that on your scheme of work as well. And then also having that financial aspect as well to your scheme of work. Students need these life skills, and even though we have an exam to prepare them for, ways to, along with ensuring that they well and meet their targets, they also have other skills that will support them in life. Cultural capital, which is important. How often have you thought writing a local poet or a local writer in your school? Remember, I spoke about students needing to see themselves in what is they're being taught, and needing to see that it is possible for them. You know, a local writer comes into school and say, when I was growing up, I was from a working class family. I, struggled through this. However, I went to university and I did this and I did this. Allow students say, yes, it is possible for me as well. And give them those real life role models that they can touch, that they can relate to as well. Students on enrichment opportunities is really important. There's so many opportunities open now, especially, and we're really thinking, especially in light with COVID and the pandemic, how to make students have those rich opportunities, so that the content of it, not because they're from this class, or they're from this gender, or they have this disability, they're not suffering or at disadvantage in any way. Local business people into school to raise aspirations as well among pupils. We talk about the career path, and teachers thought it's very useful to do entrepreneurial skills right within the lesson. I'm wrapping up now because I want to open the floor for any questions that you may have. So I'm just going through, I think I have about maybe 2 more slides I want to share. So, teachers spoke about community and relationship, that it was really important to connect different communities and relate them to modern day experiences. They spoke about ageism and how that should be one of the oracy topics that could, or the extracts that you analyze in English for the reading paper, or for section B, you have some writing opportunities around that, or some research opportunities as well. British values. At one time, I went to a school where you had to embed in every lesson, you had to, chart and map how you were catering for the British values, at least one in every lesson. I went to a school where every assembly that we had was around our British values, and that has kind of died down and is more so in PSHE now. But in English, definitely there is that, teaching students how to be tolerant, how to be responsible, the whole idea and concept of democracy, liberty, respect, and law is important as well. And this is the last slide where teachers talk, it's English is an English scheme of work, so we can't have an English scheme of work with our literary terminology and or vocabulary. So what some schools are doing is scaffolding their vocabulary. So they have tier 1 words, tier 2 words, tier 3 words. And teachers thought that as a model for tier 2 vocabulary, those 3 words should be on: discrimination, oppression, and students needing to understand those key terms. Also, literary terminology, looking at phrases, informal language, formal language, and semantic field were some. Of course, as I said before, it's an exhaustive list, and can be added, but that's just like a framework, a bones. You could take away and think about this and say, okay, how could you ensure that your scheme of work is more, well, more intersectional, using intersectional pedagogy, using this. Okay, so finally, I've gone through a lot, and I know it's been a lot. I hope you've been making notes. Is there anything that you wanted me to touch on, maybe discuss, but I haven't looked at that? So the floor is open to you. Please type it in the chat. I can see the chat. So if there is anything not being discussed, you want to talk about, you want to discuss, please put that in the chat right now. I'll give you a chance to think about if you have any questions, or give you to type it. But I'm leaving my contact detail there. I'll just put that slide up. So if you needed to, after today, get in touch via email, that's fine. Anything else that you wanted to discuss? Okay, so Catherine says, your question, Catherine. She says, so within schools, where does the whole notion of differentiation fit in? Okay, so depends on, and I'm going to ask you to clarify a little bit. When you say, are you talking, because a lot of schools have moved away from that term differentiation, and what they do is scaffold. I definitely taught in a school where we scaffold from the top to the bottom. And what that means, I know when you hear it initially, you think, oh, so what about those students who are struggling? What it meant was we would look at our levels, look at the highest one is, and then we'd still have our resources to scaffold and help students. But we wouldn't be starting from the bottom and trying to pull the top. We'd start from the top and then say, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and then give them all the other students who are struggling. So we do different things like discussions throughout the lesson to get those students to where we want. In terms of differentiation, you notice that every school, if you go on their website, they have a policy for SEN inclusion, but there isn't a policy. There's nothing. Okay, how do we cater for different genders? How do we cater for different classes? How do we cater for different races? So yes, you're differentiating in terms of, but it's a different way, isn't it? Being more, I think, deliberate. So I think about my students, not only about their levels, because I think the thorny area about differentiation is that when we think about differentiation, we're just looking at targets and the hard data. So this student is at a level 4 and we need to get them to a level 5. So how am I going to differentiate the resources to ensure that? And not really looking at, okay, this child is at a level 4, we need to get to a level 5 or a grade 5. However, this child, what is their background? What would be some of the things that really get them, some topics that you get so passionate about? Yes. What are some of the things? I know, yes, yeah. Yeah, I hope I'm answering it, Catherine. Yeah, I think so. We about, okay, race. So when I give a child a text, would they maybe write a better descriptive piece if they had a choice and the was somebody who looks like them? Or would it be an activity that they actually liked, not just a static task, giving them? And yes, for the exam, I do understand for example, AQA, it's a set picture, a stimulus material. But within our classroom practice, the students would have already been, they would have been exposed to all of these. So it wouldn't be an issue. They would have already had those meaningful resources. So when it comes to the exam, yes, it's very static and rigid, but it's just an exam. They already have the background, they already have that support, and already feel as if they matter, they're visible, their identities matter. And it's about as well linking to the relationship. I think with intersectional practices, it all links to relationship building, because we're doing so many other things as well as that. So thanks for that, Catherine, and I hope I answered it. Any other questions? We have about 4 minutes before I'm going to end this session. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask.